It is Magnus Carlsen playing the Sicilian and playing a very provocative line. It's an open Sicilian. There has been one set of pawn trades in the center. Now, with this last move, a6, we're likely to enter the Khan variation, where white takes a lot of space, but black is super flexible. What do you make of this choice by Magnus?
I think in my childhood, I loved playing against the Khan because what I would try to do is if that bishop ever went to c5, I would try to trade it off, like get rid of that dark square bishop so I could make use of the Swiss cheese. You have created holes in your position from the black side. So I think that here bishop d3 is one move, knight c3 is another. You do have a bunch of different options in the early going, but we see Magnus, I mean, he's not holding anything back, David. He's striking with b5, and if memory serves me well, didn't you have that blitz game in Retiro Park against Judith Polgar? It started something like this, and it didn't end very well for Magnus.
Oh yeah, that's a classic game. Go check out that one on YouTube. If anyone's curious, Polgar, Carlsen, a bit of a showdown. Magnus does employ this slightly risky line from time to time. I actually had this position myself back in the summer from the white side, and yeah, it does feel like black is living on the edge. You mentioned the Swiss cheese. I was highlighting some dark squares, especially the d6 square right at the front here. If a dark squared bishop ever is traded, black's piece here, the protector of that square, watch out. Oh, he plants his bishop on that square, occupying it now. This is a tactic. It is a loose square. White can, for example, consider moving his bishop out of the way, taking a pawn and hitting the bishop. But there are tactics against the white king. Watch out for bishop takes h2 ideas. At some point, black often wants to line up his queen and bishop along this diagonal to gain a bit of time. But Robert, this is really provocative. He's asking white to step forward with a pawn, take more space, please. Alireza here. He's saying that comes with pros and cons. But yeah, it just feels like Magnus doesn't care about being solid in these early stages.
So many difficult decisions posed already. As you said, e4 to e5 with tempo, but that bishop on c6 becomes much stronger when you push that e-pawn. And then if you play bishop takes b5, which I'm also tempted by, you have to calculate bishop takes h2 check, and now we get opposite colored bishops. I was talking about how I like to get rid of my opponent's dark square bishop, considering the pawn structure, but I'm not sure if that would have been advisable, giving up a kingside pawn. So e5 has been played, David. The e4 square, maybe white's for the taking. And now I'm going to ask you, does that bishop, he goes back to c7, he answers before I could ask. I wasn't sure if it would go up the board or back, but he decides to retreat and keep pressure alive on the e5 pawn and also with that bishop on c6, staring at the white king side.
Yeah, black's bishops have great potential right now. That being said, white's ahead in development. White has already castled. Black is a few moves away from doing so. Even castling now for black will be fraught with danger. The white bishop will be staring down at that flank. But Alireza starts by mobilizing on the queen side, some pressure against black's pawns over here. Two reactions. The most natural is to bypass that pawn. Black's choice here of pawn to b4 here would also gain time against the white knight. But maybe the black pawns will become weak later on. I'm also wondering, Robert, if after b4, white has a sneaky move, queen to g4, hitting the pawn on b4, or he's also hitting the pawn on g7, and this could lead to some crazy tactics right now.
Good spot there, David, because I was wondering, I mean, doesn't this look good for black at first? You get to kick that knight, it's going to go to e4, but if it goes there, you drop the e5 pawn. That means your knight cannot step along the e-file. So I thought that this was maybe a strategic mistake, but you found a tactical answer. Queen g4 is nice. You hit g7, which would trap the rook on h8, so you're not just giving away a knight for a pawn. And then if you save the g7 pawn, down goes b4. So is Magnus just giving away the b-pawn, like queen g4, knight e7. I know the g7 pawn's untouchable because rook g8 will be devastating, but I guess I'm just wondering, like, can white just take that b4 pawn now? Because that is hanging over there. It looks free. What's the deal?
Oh yeah, I'm just putting these moves on the board. The ones you were mentioning, Robert, definitely taking b4, safer than taking on g7. You ask what the deal is. I don't really see it. The eval bar says it's nothing to worry about, but black's simply a pawn down, and this must be Magnus's plan. Let's just go back to the game position. It is queen g4 on the board, double exclamation point given, because it is sacrificing a knight, but just to show everyone at home, do not take it. This is a trap of a rook. So the blue arrow has appeared saying knight e7 only move, and it's definitely up to Magnus to justify. I guess it's, okay, knight e7 indeed played. I guess it's just the fact that white will lose a bit of time with the queen later on. Knight g6 played by Magnus now, hitting white's stronghold in the center. I'm skeptical, I've got to say, Robert, but these are the top players. Magnus doesn't give up pawns for no reason, so he must have at least something on his mind here.
And I'm wondering how much of that was a sacrifice versus an oversight. I typically trust Magnus. He did play knight e7 to g6 relatively quickly, but the fact that queen g4 was played and then he thought for even a little bit makes me wonder if he actually saw it coming. But now that we're here, e5, it's targeted. If you ever push pawn to f4 to defend that loose pawn, you are weakening diagonals in front of your own king, and you're also shortchanging your queen from some squares. So that white queen can be kicked about quite a bit. So I do see how black can gain a few tempi, but still, a pawn is a pawn, is it not, David?
A pawn is a pawn, and I think both of us by nature, Robert, we like to keep our pawns intact unless we can calculate our way to finding compensation, to maybe regaining that pawn. Magnus, especially the last few years, ever since the dawn of Alpha Zero, he's been more willing to kind of give pawns away instinctively, just for squares, for activity of pieces. And yeah, the more I look at it, the more I think it might be tricky for white right now. You mentioned that f4 move. I just want to jump in and show why white cannot play the most natural move, or maybe should not play the most natural move. Pawn to f4 right now, you mentioned it. I'm just looking at, okay, first kicking the queen away. If the queen steps back, a check. And I'm already sensing some danger. King in the corner, the black queen jumps out. Look at the firepower that black has right now, hitting everything. Do not try this at home, ladies and gentlemen. Magnus not sacrificing a pawn for nothing. Firouzja still deep in thought.
Okay, so we are watching for Alireza's next move. It's not going to be an easy choice. Bishop takes knight, which is attacking that pawn e5. That would be a strategic mistake because black just takes back towards the center, and that rook on h8 develops from its starting square, allowing black to go for an attack. But this is not an easy moment. I'm trying to find alternatives here. I do not want to drop this pawn on e5. So David, Alireza brings his queen back to g4, and I have to say, I like that a lot because the king side feels safer and he's protecting g7 tactically. This is some great full board awareness from Firouzja.
Brilliant from Firouzja. And it is based on tactics, as you mentioned, Robert. You cannot really take the e5 pawn now with the black knight. g7 would fall. And if the bishop were to take, maybe multiple downsides there, but white could consider rook takes and then capturing on g7. I think black's house would collapse suddenly. It did cost Firouzja a lot of time, though, Robert. Before the game, you advised him not to drop too far behind on the clock, and he's 2 minutes down. It's still very, very early days, but he's got an extra pawn, so whose position would you prefer here?
I prefer the extra pawn. I know you and I both like our healthy material count, but I think that the time disadvantage, it's not so consequential, at least for the moment. And it's that extra pawn that is doing all the talking. Black is having difficulty even making this next turn. Do you just castle kingside? But David, now white is saying I snagged b4 and I live to tell the tale. So I think Magnus is looking for something a little bit more forcing, but where is that going to come from? You don't really have the kingside attack that you'd hope for. Your g7 pawn is always loose in a number of variations. Bishop c1 to g5 with tempo for white. h4, h5 if you get a little bit careless on that side of the board. And let's say you castle, you might walk into an attack. So I'm not really sure how Magnus proceeds from here, but it's clear to me that he's also not certain what to do.
Yeah, that's right. Robert, if you kind of, if we were capable physically of putting a black pawn on b6, for example, we would say, okay, it's just a normal position. White has great attacking chances, but white has that extra pawn. Yes, has spent several moves with his queen, Firouzja, but time is of the essence. I think Magnus needs to strike now, somehow, to gain compensation. Otherwise, this could be one-sided traffic. The time disadvantage that I was talking about has pretty much disappeared as well, down to just around 30 seconds now. I would castle here. I think Magnus might get tempted as well at some point to break out with f6 or f5 once his king has got to safety, trying to open up more lines, most importantly, for these raking bishops. But right now, proof is in the pudding. He needs to justify that pawn sacrifice, that pawn blunder from a bit earlier on. Yeah, the more I look at it, the more I think queen g4, a mark of genius from Firouzja. King safety, as you mentioned, it's looking very good for white right now.
So Firouzja doing an excellent job at the moment. Magnus desperately trying to find the accurate path forward. I like what you said, castle and an f-pawn push for black. That helps open up more avenues of attack. Maybe Magnus is also thinking about the direct path, queen b8, going right after e5, because he may want to induce f2 to f4. I'm not 100% sold on how much that helps black now that the queen is on g4 defending the king side, but he does go for that, and I think that Alireza, now is the time to get in the flow. Like, if he can play f4 quickly and then put Magnus back on the clock, I think that he is going to be in good shape, but I can get why he would be hesitant to make that move. It does open up some diagonals in front of his king.
That's right. I was warning against f4 just a few moments ago, but now it is slightly more of a different story here. The white queen is perched, perfectly on the right flank here. She's protecting her king, also potentially attacking. So, okay, we do see the moves we were expecting. F4 defending a pawn, black castles. I think Magnus at some point will have to try to gamble, break the white stronghold in the center, f6 or d6. And still plenty of play ahead. The black queen, you might be asking at home, why is she kind of parked on this square? She is exerting some pressure on the white queen side. So every pawn you drop, it means you get open lines. Some solace there, but knight e4 heading in that direction, Robert. One or two more moves and it might be Firouzja. His attack that is deadly after all. This one is hanging in the balance. The eval bar says level, but it's anything but calm right now.
And I love moves like knight to e4. Any Sicilian, you want to bring that firepower towards the king side, especially with the bishop on d3. There will be some attacking chances if that knight can get to g5. And your idea, David, which was such a good one, f6 or f5, it looks a lot less appealing now because white takes a... Oh, okay, it looks less appealing to me, but it's a great move from Magnus. I would be way too scared to play like this, David, and yet it was the best decision from black.
Yeah, I think it was born out of necessity, that choice. I liked the idea when the white knight wasn't lurking in the center near the black king. And suddenly the black knight is the only thing preventing a decisive attack. But I think more urgently, Magnus realized he needed to open up his bishops. He needed to break white's bind in the center. And yeah, risky decision, but ultimately justified. And Firouzja at least has to deal with some threats of his own now. This pawn is hanging. A second f5 move is threatened with a proper fork. And wow, Robert, I was going to say we should check out Division 2, Division 3, but suddenly just this last move alone and things have exploded.
And we do have a draw between Denis Lazovic and Wesley So. These two players, I mean, some of the most solid on the planet. Not surprised that there's little separating them. We will keep everyone updated as more results come in. But, I mean, you mentioned f5 for black. I was thinking f5 for white at the moment. I'm not sure how viable it is because it drops h2 with check. And, okay, I keep saying how I wouldn't do something. Then I say how I will, and then it happens on the board. But h2 is hanging right now, and Magnus picks it up. Material is even, David, but this position is chaotic.
It's chaotic purely because both kings are under fire right now. The white king, temporarily safe, you might say, in the corner, but won't be safe forever. There's not much shelter around it right now. And the black king under serious pressure as well. Knight takes f6 is the immediate threat. I guess black can defend against that in multiple ways. Dropping the bishop back looks relatively healthy, but white's going to add more kind of wood to the fire here. Bishop's going to land on h6. The cage will be closing around the black king. I think I would still take white here, Robert. He might have given the pawn back, but another good tip for everyone at home, sometimes materialism, you don't have to worry about it. It's more about getting to the enemy king.
There's so many different ideas in this position. I'm already looking at tactics. You know, if that knight on e4 were to move, that g2 pawn feels very tender. There will be sacrifices available on that square. So in a way, I'm wondering, is knight takes f6 actually a threat? Like, because we see a trade on f6, bishop g2, queen g3 ideas. I'm not entirely sure, so I'm being fully honest there. But it just seems like a position where either side could make a mistake. And queen e5, I'm wondering now, is knight takes f6 check an option because the rook stares down at the queen. The queen is needed to protect the bishop on h2. David, you get where I'm going with this. It is so hectic here that even a great seeming tactic, it may backfire because there could be counter shots.
Yeah, counter shots, tactics all over the place. I just noticed at the bottom of our screens, Robert, there, for the viewers at home as well, 99% accuracy from Firouzja, despite how complicated it's been. Magnus's accuracy was at 99.6% until this last move. It did drop slightly below the 99 mark, but incredible. I mean, queen to e5, I would say another natural move, but so much to calculate. And Magnus played it so quickly. And Robert the Prophet, you've guessed it all. And Magnus finds a convoluted way to give up his queen, Robert. It's queen for rook and knight right now, but watch out, the white king, as you mentioned, not relaxing right now. This is crazy. Magnus, queen sacrifice.
Yeah, if we can bring up an analysis board ever so quickly, I was not anticipating a queen sacrifice. I thought that after the knight captured on f6 with check, that black would just take back with the queen, and you may be down a pawn in the ensuing queenless position, but I thought that black would have some counter chances. The rook is active, the bishop on c6 looks nice, but clearly the evaluation bar and Magnus Carlsen's brain say otherwise. So we see a material imbalance, and white has a queen at the moment for a rook and a knight, but white also has an extra pawn. So it's like 10 points worth of material for just about 8-9 points. So white does have extra material, David, but the white king is in some serious danger.
Ooh, look at Magnus. He's motoring forward now. Momentum on black side. Big threat to capture on g2, at least to restore the material balance. And okay, Firouzja, he needs to get his pieces out. I don't think there's any way of stopping that threat, Robert. For a second, I was going to suggest bishop to e4, block that diagonal, but whoops, suddenly the guardian of the f1 square would be gone, and that would be a checkmate in one move. There's pitfalls all over the place. Firouzja down under 1 minute. Maybe he just needs to get developed. If he could get these two pieces into the action, he would be able to defend and convert his material advantage. How does he do it, though? How does he calm himself and readjust to this new situation?
I was about to make a second checkmate allowance. Bishop takes g6, falls for the same rook f1. So, you just told me what could happen if you move the bishop, and I still tried it anyway. This is what you call not learning your lesson. So, okay, we can't move the light square bishop very easily. Bishop e3 does allow that capture on g2, and I guess we could evaluate the ensuing position. The bishop pair does look strong, but there may not be enough material remaining to have great winning chances. But he does it in a different way, David. He's giving up the queen, but he's also keeping an eye on the b2 pawn. This is a better path forward for Firouzja.
Yeah, he's trying to bait Magnus now into those exchanges. And okay, the queen sacrifice was just temporary in the end. It's level material now, and we're heading into an endgame. But Robert, this is very reminiscent of Firouzja's win yesterday against Levon Aronian. It was opposite color bishops there. Light squared bishop against dark squared bishop. He had the exact same kind of ingredients to win that game. And 17 seconds, that's the only problem for him. But do you imagine Firouzja here maybe motoring forward the queenside pawns? Still any chances for a win?
This looks a lot like that game against Levon from yesterday. And for black, you have the worst pawns. They're all isolated. That means another pawn can't defend it. You have to use your more valuable pieces. But look at Magnus. He's trying to counter. He's trying to put pressure on white's vulnerable pawns. And if you go rook b8, white will play this little move, rook to a2, and just keep everything honest. So look at the rook swing over here. David, this is not going to be easy for Magnus. And he does give up the h-pawn. And Magnus does make it look easy. It's his point now that you give a pawn with check, but b2 is falling. If you push b2, down goes c3, and the whole chain will just collapse.
Yeah, genius endgame play by both sides, I've got to say. I think Firouzja slightly panicking. Maybe he needed to just consolidate there, bring the white king nearer to the center. But yeah, Magnus, great decision. Another great little nugget there for everyone at home. Piece activity, king activity is all important. Who cares about pawns short term? He's going to regain the material here, and yes, white can bail out with a move such as rook b6 now, offer a trade of rooks. He does so to protect his queenside pawns, but opposite color bishops, it's just pawns all on one flank. Unlike yesterday, Robert, where we had the trousers separated past pawns marching up the board, overwhelming black on both flanks. This time, with everything concentrated just on one side, should be a draw now.
And perhaps even a draw without one of these two pawns there, but now it just easy. You put your bishop in line with the c5 square, so white's never able to push through. And with these last trades, I think the players will agree to a draw in the near future. David, a hard-fought game in this first one. Bishop b5 is funny, saying we can draw, it's okay. But David, impressive game from both these two. The tactical flair is a treat for all of us to watch.
That's right. These were two giants of the game in full flow.